Tommy Lee Jones has never belonged to a single era. He stands as one of the most unyielding figures American cinema has ever produced. Not simply a star shaped by studio lights, but a testament to endurance, discipline, and the hard, weathered soul of American storytelling. His presence carries weight before a single line is spoken. Across generations, his name still reverberates, anchored by performances that refuse to fade. The relentless deputy U.S. Marshal Samuel Gerard, the impassive, razor-dry Agent K, the worn, morally burdened Sheriff Ed Tom Bell. These roles are not remembered as performances so much as fixtures in the cultural landscape, etched so deeply they feel permanent, from the oil-stained fields of Texas to the cloistered halls of Harvard. And then into an industry that rarely forgives hesitation, Jones rose without shortcuts. More than 70 films, an Academy Award, a Golden Globe, an Emmy, not the product of marketing or myth-making, but of labor that demanded payment in full. Yet admiration never arrives alone. It carries a cost few are willing to name. And there are wounds that only surface after the applause has emptied the room. Walk with us through a life marked by triumphs, but soaked through with storms, and begin to understand the magnitude of the blow that has recently fallen. Before this journey continues, pause for a moment. Leave a heart. Tap like. Acknowledge. A life that gave everything it had to become unforgettable. It feels almost cruel that a man the world would one day revere learned strength where comfort was never promised. Born on September 15th, 1946, in the dust-colored town of San Saba, Texas, Tommy Lee Jones arrived into a life ruled by necessity. Survival came first, softness came last. His mother, Lucille, held the family together through relentless endurance, working multiple jobs stitched together by fatigue and resolve. His father, Clyde, returned from the oil fields each night carrying exhaustion and a volatility that kept the household permanently on edge. Peace never stayed long. It passed through like wind through cracked boards. Their marriage fractured, reassembled, and fractured again. Each collapse left behind raised voices, silence, and disappointment that learned how to linger. Years later, Jones would acknowledge with restrained clarity how early he learned that stability was fragile, that life could tilt without warning. When the oil market collapsed in the early 1950s and his father lost his job, tension stopped visiting and moved in permanently. The family moved again and again, Midland, Sabinal, Roten. Familiarity never had time to settle. By 12, he had attended 7 schools, absorbing lessons no classroom could offer: how to read a room, how to stay alert, how to disappear into silence when the air sharpened. Then came the night that never loosened its grip. At 3:47 a.m. in 1954, an oil rig explosion ripped through the darkness, turning night into firelit dawn. Equipment warped, shockwaves rattled the trailer park, lives were lost. His father was among the injured, standing barefoot in the doorway, watching the ambulance doors close. 8-year-old Tommy learned in a single breath that the world could end without asking permission. Later, he would remember that moment not with drama, but with gravity. Nothing solid stays solid forever. In the months that followed, as his father fought through recovery, Tommy did not wait for instruction. He worked. He fixed what he could. He carried responsibility far heavier than his years. Not heroism. Instinct. Survival learned before language. By adolescence, the storms no longer lived only outside him. Football became his release, the one place where impact made sense and noise replaced silence. At 16, his collisions carried everything he never spoke at home. Anger sometimes cost him playing time. Still, the field offered something rare. Judgment fell away, a scholarship to St. Mark's School of Texas in 1962, lifted him into halls polished with certainty he did not yet trust. There, he learned that discipline could be chosen, not enforced. But every summer, he returned to the oil rigs. 14-hour shifts, brutal heat, diesel air, accidents that unfolded without mercy. In 1963, a 500-pound drill bit broke loose and slammed into the platform beside him. 1 inch closer and everything would have ended. He earned barely enough to survive, lost weight he couldn't afford to lose, and carried home something heavier still, a vow that this life would not claim him. Those years did not simply harden him, they prepared him. Long before a camera ever found his face, Tommy Lee Jones was already paying for the man the world would one day admire. Comment 79 or write "Rip Tommy Lee Jones" to honor them. ****. It is almost ruthless how a life shaped by hardship can split open into possibility. Not gently, not by invitation, but by refusal to surrender. That was the force of the moment in the fall of 1965, when 19-year-old Tommy Lee Jones stepped onto the grounds of Harvard University. One worn suitcase, one hard-earned scholarship. A lifetime of storms sealed behind eyes, trained never to ask for mercy. His first anchor was a narrow dorm room, Mahal B12, shared with Al Gore, still unknown to history, and Bob Summerby, a friendship that would endure long after ambition scattered others in different directions. Surrounded by confidence and inherited ease, Tommy felt the distance between his past and his present like pressure against his ribs. Years later, he would recall without bitterness that he never felt certain he belonged, only that he could not afford to waste the chance. That belief became his quiet vow. Harvard demanded everything. On the football field, jersey number 61 absorbed collisions with a ferocity shaped by years of swallowed fear. In 1968, during the legendary 29-29 comeback against Yale, he stood, drenched in sweat, refusing to fold, unmovable as the clock blowed away certainty. When the lights shifted to the stage, another truth emerged. In Coriolanus, his intensity unsettled audiences. In The Ladies Not for Burning, opposite John Lithgow, his precision carried the weight of survival rather than privilege. These were not performances polished by comfort. They were carved by necessity. He would later say Harvard taught him how to learn, that the stage showed him who he might become. Graduating in 1969 at 22, he carried that fragile belief into New York City, a place indifferent to pedigree and merciless toward hesitation. The city answered him with cold walk-ups, rattling radiators, sleepless nights, and winters that slipped through thin walls like knives. Money disappeared faster than hope. Auditions ended in polite smiles and closed doors. There were nights when hunger outwrestled pride. Nights when he walked miles through slush because a bus ticket felt like surrender. Nights spent reading scripts under street lamps after the electricity in his room had been cut. New York did not care where he came from. It asked only how much he could endure. Looking back, he would say he understood there was no return, only forward. He accepted every role offered. Dim rehearsal rooms, off-Broadway stages where audiences barely filled a row. Fortune and Men's Eyes, 4 on a Garden. Blue Boys, Ulysses and Nightdown. None brought recognition, but each stripped fear away and replaced it with craft. Applause was thin, paychecks thinner, yet something inside him settled, dense and immovable, like steel cooling after fire. Then came a measure of air. From 1971 to 1975, a steady role as Dr. Mark Tolan on One Life to Live gave him permission to breathe again, cautiously, as if breath itself might still be taken away. Just before that lifeline fully held, a brief appearance in Love Story quietly shifted the ground beneath his feet, opening a door he had been pushing against without knowing it could move. The past did not vanish, but it loosened its grip. The boy who once watched an ambulance disappear into the dark had crossed hunger, rejection, and doubt to reach his first stretch of solid ground. He was no longer running from what shaped him. He was rising deliberately, into a man defined not by what he endured, but by what he refused to surrender. Greatness does not arrive with permission. Sometimes it tears through silence like a storm that refuses to move on. By the late 1970s, Hollywood could feel that pressure gathering around Tommy Lee Jones. He was no longer merely a survivor of dust and danger. He was an artist being sharpened by forces that demanded everything and returned nothing gently. In the amazing Howard Hughes, Rolling Thunder, Eyes of Love or Mars, and Backroads, there was a gravity that felt bruised and lived in. Audiences sensed it before they could explain it. Years later, he would say he was never chasing emotion, only uncovering it from places he would rather have left buried. Each set became another oil rig, early mornings, long hours. Precision demanded long after comfort collapsed. Coal Miner's Daughter became a rupture point. His portrayal of Doolin earned a Golden Globe nomination and announced a presence Hollywood could no longer overlook. What the screen never revealed was the cost: punishing lights, endless retakes, a voice worn raw, emotions dragged up until nothing remained. He accepted it without complaint, once noting that exhaustion was proof he was still needed. By 1983, the fire burned hotter and far more inward. The executioner's song demanded a stillness so severe it bordered on self-erasure. For weeks, he carried the role like weight locked behind his ribs, sleep fractured, words rationed, energy conserved as if survival depended on it. Between takes, he sat alone, rehearsing the descent back into darkness. When the Emmy came, he accepted it without ceremony, his mind already on the next day's work. Fame never softened him. Discipline governed every breath. The late 1980s carved deeper lines. In The Park Is Mine, he carried the sorrow of a forgotten veteran through freezing nights. In Lonesome Dove, Captain Woodrow Call, unyielding, wounded, stripped of romance, settled into the national conscience. He admitted some characters followed him home, some never truly left. After 14-hour days in the saddle, dust thick in his lungs, he would sit in silence that felt crowded because the work refused release. Then came the 1990s, a decade that sealed his legend while quietly demanding its own toll. JFK cut sharply enough to earn an Academy Award nomination. Under Siege revealed unpredictability. But The Fugitive changed everything. As Deputy U.S. Marshal Samuel Gerard, he did not perform. He commanded. The shoot was relentless. Long nights. Physical precision. No margin for error. On screen, it looked effortless. Off screen, it was attrition. When the film surged past $370 million worldwide and he accepted the Oscar, he paused, eyes lowered, breath held, as if replaying the climb from Texas oil rigs to Hollywood's brightest lights. That stillness carried decades of missed sleep and aching resolve. The roles that followed natural-born killers, the client, caught burned with the same refusal to cheat truth. He lived by a creed that every frame must be earned. The 2000s did not soften him. They deepened him. From Space Cowboys to the Three Burials of Melquiades Estrada, from In the Valley of Elah to No Country for Old Men, one truth remained unmistakable. Tommy Lee Jones did not build a career. He constructed a monument stone by stone. Through endurance few ever saw, Comment 79 or Write Rip Tommy Lee Jones to honor them. Asterisk. There is a particular cruelty reserved for those who reach the summit only to feel the ground begin to soften beneath their feet. By the early 1980s, as Tommy Lee Jones moved into his 40s, his authority on screen had become unquestioned. Studios leaned on him as if he were load-bearing steel, expecting him to carry entire productions without falter. The pressure did not arrive loudly. It tightened slowly, almost politely, until it was everywhere. On the set of Black Moon Rising in 1986, those closest to him sensed the shift. Silences stretched longer. His shoulders stayed locked. Exhaustion settled into his face like a permanent climate. Linda Hamilton would later recall that he drank not for pleasure, but to quiet something restless and unnamed. Tommy never argued with that memory. When asked years later, he offered only a pared-down truth. There are stretches of life where grit is all that keeps you standing when grace does not arrive. He bound himself together, with will alone, and stepped before the camera as if nothing inside him had cracked. That pressure sometimes surfaced. His devotion to emotional accuracy, so devastating on screen, could become combustible when the air grew too tight. During Batman Forever, his severe discipline collided with Jim Carrey's improvisational electricity. It was not hostility. It was friction between two forces under blockbuster weight. Crew members remembered metal props bending slightly in his hands, a jaw set hard, breath held before another take as if bracing for impact. Men in Black demanded a different sacrifice. Endless nights, surgical timing, stunts that tolerated no error. Yet his commitment was never questioned. One crew member later said he carried films the way some men carry burdens alone, as though setting them down would betray something sacred. Life pressed harder still. In 1998, at 52, he was thrown violently from his horse during a polo match. Before he could rise, the animal stepped onto him. His lungs collapsed into a single soundless moment. The edges of the world dimmed. Witnesses said his eyes fluttered, unfocused, as if he were deciding whether to return. Doctors later called his survival fortunate. 48 hours later, bruised and barely upright, Tommy appeared beside his team. Not to play, just to be there. When asked why he wasn't resting, he answered simply, "A man shows up." A year later, while filming Double Jeopardy, he insisted on performing an underwater stunt himself. His leg caught below the surface. Cold closed in. Panic pressed against his ribs as the distance to air widened. A rescue diver later said he went eerily still, as if preparing for whatever came next. He was pulled free just in time. Afterward, he sat alone, coughing, shaking, breathing through fear, then nodded once and finished the day. No speech, no complaint. Endurance. The storms did not recede. A lawsuit following an injury at his ranch in 2010 cost him hundreds of thousands in legal fees despite a courtroom win. Years later, selling his Florida polo estate brought a loss nearing $15 million. A quiet financial wound that cut deeper than most ever knew. As he stepped back from Hollywood after 2019, roles thinned, income softened, and the industry no longer revolved around the intensity he once embodied. He spoke of it without bitterness. You take the work seriously while it's yours. When it's finished, you think it and you move on. The pattern revealed itself without explanation. Tommy Lee Jones did not rise because life was generous. He rose because every fracture hardened him. Each near breaking point became resolve. Every unseen burden taught him how to endure. Behind the legend stands a man who chose resilience again and again, even as admiration quietly demanded more than it ever promised to give back. Then came the loss no discipline could contain. At the beginning of 2026, grief arrived not as a storm, but as an unanswerable silence. His beloved daughter was gone at just 34. He was 79 when it happened, an age when time already feels narrow and fragile. She would never turn 35. A truth so brutal in its arithmetic, it reduced every achievement, every monument of work, to something suddenly small. When he first held her in 1991, the world still felt wide. He believed, as fathers do, that protection and persistence could always be rearranged later. After the work slowed, after the next obligation was met, years passed quickly, carried by sets, flights, deadlines, responsibility. Fatherhood lived in quieter spaces, late-night calls between schedules, Promises spoken softly, plans made with confidence there would always be more time. In the final years, he called more often, listened longer, let silence exist where he once rushed to fill it, saved messages he meant to answer properly, planned a visit he believed could wait, intention he thought could still outrun the calendar. It could not. When the call came, there was no authority to summon, no role capable of shielding him from the truth that one familiar name would never light his phone again. Morning arrived anyway. Light crossed the floor as it always had. The world refused to pause. A chair remained pushed in. A message stayed saved because deleting it felt like erasing proof she had existed. Silence did not crash in. It settled permanently as if it had been waiting. He had faced explosions, danger, judgment, and time itself. Nothing prepared him for the moment when every instinct to protect collided with a future that no longer existed. This was not failure, not punishment. It was the final boundary even the strongest are never allowed to cross back over. Admiration felt irrelevant. No honor could bridge the distance that had opened quietly inside his life. A father must continue living in a world that still moves forward while his child does not. Comment 79 or right. Rip Tommy Lee Jones to honor them. Asterisk, asterisk, long before the world learned to say his name with reverence. Before awards and authority and the weight of legend gathered around his shoulders, Tommy Lee Jones stepped into his first marriage carrying wounds he had never learned to name. In 1971, at 25, he married writer Kate Lardner. Her presence felt like a clearing of light in a life trained for vigilance. Their early years in New York carried the fragile sweetness only youth allows. Shared coffee in cold apartments, walks through borrowed streets. Two dreamers believing love alone could steady uncertain ground. Friends remembered how he softened beside her, how she sensed the watchfulness in him, the storms he never spoke of but carried everywhere. New York demanded more than either fully understood. Tommy raced from audition to audition, returning late and emptied, his clothes carrying rain and backstage dust. Kate chased deadlines, trying to reach a man who often lived behind a silent sheep long before she arrived. Their apartment held warmth and hope, but also the quiet friction of two ambitions pressing too close. Some nights stretched into dawn with whispered plans. Others closed heavy, words left untouched. Years later, he would look back with painful honesty and admit he didn't know how to slow his breathing then, how to stay even for someone who mattered deeply. As the mid-1970s approached, small fractures widened. His work pulled outward into rehearsals and road productions. Hers pulled inward into pages and solitude. They wanted the same horizon, yet were becoming different people trying to reach it. With no children to anchor the drift, distance grew undeniable. Love didn't vanish. It changed shape, bending under pressures neither had learned to release. In 1978, after 7 years marked by tenderness and strain, they parted quietly. No scandal, no bitterness, just an ache and the shared understanding that affection can survive even when a marriage cannot. He would later say he loved her deeply, but didn't yet know how to protect what they had. It was his first true heartbreak, not loud, not theatrical, devastating in its restraint. Two people learning too late that endurance does not teach intimacy, that strength does not automatically teach how to stay. The ending arrived gently, and that gentleness made it linger. Hope has a way of returning with a brightness, so sharp it feels less like rescue and more like warning. 5 years later, in 1981, hope struck him head-on. He met Kimberly Claw-Hesse, and her presence did not merely comfort him. It reset the room. Where his past had been jagged, she was steady. Where life had been merciless, she was gentle. Friends watched a guarded man loosen. a storm-worn soul finally exhale. Their wedding that year was small and sincere, a promise spoken by two people who understood how easily things can break. In 1982, holding his newborn son, Austin, he barely dared to blink. He whispered a vow shaped by awe and fear that his child would feel safe every day. The man who had survived explosions in isolation now found himself undone by devotion to something so small. Nearly a decade later, after years of hope, their daughter Victoria arrived in 1991. To Tommy, her birth felt like grace placed carefully in his hands. For a time, Grace lived in their home. Pancake mornings, crayon drawings, small feet running down hallways. These were the years that remade him. Vigilance loosened, laughter returned, but success is rarely gentle with those waiting behind the door. As his career detonated in the late 1980s and early 1990s, scripts sagged high, flights blurred, and 14-hour days bled into nights when he slipped home long after the children slept. Kimberly carried the weight of two young lives largely alone. She once confided it felt like watching him fade. Not away from them, but into someone everyone else needed more. He worked with the urgency of a man terrified that pausing might undo the ground he had fought to build. Without intending to, he began choosing the world that applauded over the one that waited. By the midnight 90s, distance was measured in missed moments. Candles blown out on set, dinners gone cold, arguments hushed so children wouldn't hear something breaking. In 1996, after 15 years bound by love and strain, they released what they could no longer hold. The deepest wound wasn't legal. It was standing in the doorway, realizing the sound of small footsteps would never meet him there again. Comment 79 or write, "Rip Tommy Lee Jones to honor them." Asterisk, there comes a season when applause thins, when the roar of the world recedes, and the quiet inside a man's own home presses harder than anything he ever faced beneath studio lights. By the late 1990s, Tommy Lee Jones had entered that season. 2 marriages behind him, children growing up at a distance, a career that still demanded intensity, precision, and emotional blood. From the outside, he appeared immovable, disciplined, steel-backed. Inside, something essential had been worn down by years of restraint. Friends described him as present but unreachable. A man who showed up, carried the weight, did the work, and then disappeared inward. Then, in 1996, Don Laurel entered his life without spectacle. No dramatic collision. No spark designed for stories. Just calm. The first time they spoke, he did not feel excitement. He felt something loosen. Later, he would say quietly, almost with surprise, that she saw him. 5 words that carried decades of meaning. Years of being respected and feared, but rarely known. Their connection grew in overlooked spaces. Don noticed the way fatigue followed him home, how silence often carried more weight than speech. He noticed how she listened without pushing, how she stayed when he withdrew, how she never tried to repair what he wasn't ready to name. She did not pursue the actor. She met the man beneath the reputation. When they married in 2001, after years of careful trust building, the ceremony was small enough to vanish into the Texas wind. No audience. No performance. For Tommy, it felt like stepping into light after decades of adjusting his eyes to darkness. Their early life together was quiet in the best sense. Mornings shaped by routine. Evenings unclaimed by obligation. A love that asked for presence, not dominance. For a man accustomed to emotional austerity, that gentleness felt almost unreal. But love does not erase the past. It carries it. As he moved into his late 50s and 60s, the roles grew heavier. Films demanded he reopen grief and moral fracture he had spent a lifetime containing. Those performances followed him home. Don saw the cost in ways the industry never could. Nights when he sat silent on the edge of the bed, trying to set a character's sorrow down somewhere outside himself. Mourning slowed not by age, but by exhaustion of the spirit. Long stretches apart, missed holidays, fatigue that sometimes made them quiet, sometimes brittle, yet this marriage did not fracture. It bent. Don traveled when distance threatened to hollow him, and Tommy learned, awkwardly but sincerely, to stop, to turn back, to say, "Let's take a day." A small sentence that marked a profound shift. More than 2 decades later, their bond has settled into something rarer than romance, endurance, togetherness shaped by choice, not illusion. Today, at 79, Tommy Lee Jones lives a life that appears almost serene from a distance, but it carries the unmistakable weight of everything he has survived and everything he can never reclaim. His wealth, built over decades of relentless discipline, has never been the center of his identity. It buys quiet, space, and control. Land rather than luxury. Ranches across Texas where the horizon remains wide and unbroken. These are working landscapes, not ornaments. Fences repaired by hand. Horses cared for. Soil walked at dawn. His homes reflect the same philosophy. Built for durability, lived in, rooms shaped by memory rather than display. He favors function over spectacle, ranch trucks over indulgence, tools that serve a life actually lived. Nothing exists to impress strangers. Everything answers a single question: does this serve the life I live now? That life is slower, more inward, marked by a grief that does not announce itself but changes the atmosphere of a room. Losing his daughter altered time itself. It shows in pauses, in longer listening, in the way certain rooms feel heavier. He stays close to family, calls more often, shows up whenever he can. His marriage to Dawn continues quietly, anchored in routine and mutual understanding. 2 people choosing the same small things again and again because they know how quickly later disappears. He works selectively now. Roles chosen for substance, not scale. He supports causes quietly without attaching his name when possible. He protects silence because he once went without it. And in that silence, the deeper meaning of his life reveals itself. Admiration builds legends. It does not keep families whole. Achievement fills careers. It does not return missed mornings. Wealth buys privacy. It does not purchase one more ordinary day with the people you love. If his story moved you, leave a heart. Share the moment of his work you still carry. And consider this: what would you never postpone again, no matter the cost? That answer may be the most honest tribute of all. Comment 79, or write "Rip Tommy Lee Jones" to honor them.